Camp is gone and it's your fault. Exhibit A. So, on July 11th, 2023, the trailer for Wonka, featuring Timothée Chalamet, was released, and overall, it was a pretty inoffensive trailer. It revealed enough to show how it'd be different from previous installments of the Wonka franchise, while not giving too much away about its own plot and emotional beats. Not to mention, the music seemed decent, and the visuals, while definitely toned down from previous films, were still interesting and polished. So you'd think the internet would react accordingly, but yeah, despite the fact that the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory story has been known in pop culture to be wacky and zany for decades now, apparently this...
So quiet up and listen down. Nope, scratch that, reverse it.
...was too much for the general movie-going populace.
Think of a magician, inventor, and chocolate maker. So quiet up and listen down. Nope, scratch that, reverse it.
But then again, at the time, Timothée Chalamet was basically the normie equivalent of a Tumblr sexy man, so part of the hate might have been people just not liking that he was acting in a way that didn't align with their own image of him in their minds. Seriously, you guys do realize that at least half of all Hollywood actors were cringe theater kids at one point, right? Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I feel like entertainment, at least mainstream entertainment, has been seriously lacking in camp these days. As mentioned before, the world of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a wacky one, even looking back at its origins as a novel. But a lot of that silly and whimsical energy has been lost in our culture. And the 2023 Wonka movie is, in my opinion, a pretty strong example of how that loss has started to impact popular media. No, Wonka was not a terrible film. I didn't regret watching it, but it just felt lacking. Especially as someone who grew up with the 1971 and 2005 adaptations. And it begs the question, where did all the silliness go? Exhibit B. In January of 2024, the movie adaptation of the Mean Girls musical came out with some very interesting reactions online. Yeah, apparently a lot of people were completely surprised to find out that the movie was a musical, with, singing and dancing and stuff. Now, part of me was a little confused why people didn't know that going in, since... wouldn't you be curious why they'd make a remake of a movie that's only 20 years old? I don't know, I feel like I'd investigate that further myself, but watching the trailers for the film, it became pretty clear what was going on. These trailers completely hid the fact that the movie was a musical. In the November 2023 trailer, the first one that got released, there is not a single audio clip of a song, and only 2 clips of the characters dancing, both of which are coded with plausible deniability. Compare this to the trailer for 2007's Hairspray, a story that underwent the same pipeline of movie to movie musical. This film was way more open about its nature as a musical, and that wasn't surprising, because at the time, no marketing executive would ever even need to worry about something being a musical affecting box office performance. So why does it matter now? Well, younger millennials, Gen Z, and probably Gen Alpha if we don't change things soon, is kind of allergic to any genuine expressions of fun and whimsy. And unfortunately, musicals, even the more serious ones, harbor an inherently above average level of fun and whimsy since, breaking out into song and dance isn't like a normal thing people do in real life. And because of that, nowadays being a musical is something to be embarrassed about. So honestly, I can't even be mad at the Mean Girls marketing team for doing what they did, because they were just reading the room. It didn't used to be this way though. As someone who grew up in the 2000s, I had absolutely no lack of fun and campy films to choose from. And it was great. It was nice to see goofy stories actually dedicate themselves to their goofiness, not hide or dampen it like they do now. I guess I've just been feeling such an absence of campy media in pop culture, and it's seriously starting to bore me. So let's get into it. Okay, so out of obligation to the conventions of a YouTube video essay, we're going to start with an exploration of the term camp, which I can promise will only be somewhat pretentious in nature. Wikipedia defines camp as, quote, an aesthetic and sensibility that regards something as appealing or amusing because of its heightened level of artifice, affectation, and exaggeration, especially when there's also a playful or ironic element. Dictionary.com defines it as something that provides irreverent or knowing amusement as by virtue of its being theatrically stylized and extravagantly artificial, self-consciously artless, or ironically ingenuous. Merriam-Webster defines it as, okay, I'm bored. If you want a fancier exploration of the term, here's some screenshots of a famous essay written in 1964 that I'll link in the description about what does and doesn't make something camp. Overall, though, camp and campy media has a lot to do with exaggeration, pushing elements of set design, costume design, sound design, acting, directing, writing, you name it. It's very in your face about what it is and doesn't say sorry for it. That second part is especially important to keep in mind since it's what distinguishes camp from parody. While parody seeks to make fun of what it is, or rather what it's mimicking, camp seeks to embrace and exaggerate it as a means of celebrating it. I also think it's important to distinguish camp from, like, vintage. That's probably not the right way to say it, but what I mean is, in order for something to be truly camp, it needs to have been considered camp for its own time. This statement might be a little more controversial since it really depends on if you view camp as more of an intention on part of the creative or an experience on part of the consumer, but for the sake of limiting the scope of the kinds of media I'll be talking about in this video, I'm going to stick with a more conservative approach, which means I won't consider media having outdated visual effects or a different sense of humor than what we'd expect today to immediately make it camp. So even if engaging with said media evokes a sense of camp in a modern day viewer, if the effect is only relative, then I'm not going to count it. A good example of this would be the original Star Trek series, which, while seemingly campy now, at the time was enjoyed pretty unironically, so yeah. Campy movies have been around for a while and have definitely made their mark on pop culture. My parents grew up constantly making references to Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Ace Ventura, Austin Powers, Men in Black, Zoolander, and many more films that I would honestly be baffled to see produced today. But I suppose that's not entirely surprising. I think camp in adult media has always been a little riskier to produce, given that its exaggerated nature can be easily conflated with being childish, and some producers, actors, and other professionals might not want to muddle their target demographic or pigeonhole themselves into certain typecasts, but I don't know. I don't think that's all that's going on. Because even kids' media feels significantly less campy these days, which is weird since it's like the one place producers should be able to consistently get away with it. But then again, kids are growing up a lot faster with the internet these days, so maybe that's a factor? I'm not totally sure, but I watched Imaginary Friends recently, and while there were things I liked about it, like the plot twist at the end and some of the character designs, I just felt like it had so much untapped potential. I couldn't help but compare it to Enchanted, which came out in the 2000s and had the same target demographic, but clearly had way more fun with itself as a reverse fairy tale isekai. Like, I watched this movie and I feel like the characters are having fun, which unfortunately I did not feel at all with Imaginary Friends, which is interesting too because John Krasinski isn't a bad director or actor. He's had some good films, but unfortunately, if you don't indulge a certain amount of whimsy inside of your soul and then try to execute on an idea like this, you're gonna get something that falls flat. But who knows? The audience response to this movie wasn't bad, so maybe it's just my nostalgia getting in the way. It's just hard to have fun with those sorts of dampened concepts when you're someone who grew up with movies like Spy Kids, The Grinch, Lazy Town, Herbie, etc. I know those movies and shows weren't perfect. In fact, some of them were pretty flawed, but at least they were committed to what they were. It might just be a personal preference, but I'd rather watch something that genuinely tries but fails spectacularly than something that only kinda sorta succeeds but leaves me bored the whole time. The thing is, though, it's not even just movies these days. Even music videos feel stale. Like, artists used to go crazy with different ideas and art directions and settings, but now, well, a lot of songs don't even get music videos anymore, and when they do, they're kind of boring. But that's honestly only really in the West. Like, I've undergone a mild K-pop arc over the past 3 to 4 years, and I think a huge part of that is just how much more fun the music videos are in that industry. Just look at how much love goes into these set designs and costumes and choreography. America needs to get its act together. I do want to add one more thing to the camp conversation though, and that's how I find it interesting that a lot of campy media is live action. Honestly, as I was writing this script, I was having trouble coming up with like any examples of animated camp, because even though things like Space Jam come to mind, I think the fact that it's an animation live action hybrid is actually kind of the major contributing factor for it feeling camp to begin with, so it doesn't really count towards being truly animated camp. I guess the more I think about it though, the reason may have to do with the fact that animation in and of itself is already fundamentally about exaggeration, so like it's harder to be seen as camp. But I do think there are some examples, like the One Punch Man anime is kind of camp, but it's also kind of parody. Not that something can't be both, but it does muddy the waters a little bit. Also, similar to K-pop, anime is its own separate industry with its own standards and conventions, so given that most of what I'm discussing in this video is from a Western perspective, I'm not sure how firmly I can make such claims. Also, I don't really watch that much anime, so to be honest, I don't know if I can conduct a thorough analysis on this matter. So I suppose if I limit myself to Western animation, the best example of fully animated camp I can come up with is the Murder Drone series, which pushes its edgy aesthetic and writing to a comical extreme, but never actually puts itself down for it. It's honestly kind of a beautiful experience just for that alone. But yeah, I'm having trouble thinking of other examples here, so if anyone has any, please let me know in the comments. Now, a lot of the campy media I've mentioned so far in this video has managed to get pretty decent ratings and or dedicated fan bases, but it does seem like even back in the day, campy stories did face obstacles to critical success. It seems that just like today, people back then weren't that good at identifying when something just, wasn't for them versus when it was actually bad. That's not to say that any camp that gets criticized didn't deserve it and was just misunderstood by a bunch of stuffy cinephiles. Plenty of campy movies are genuinely just kind of bad. For example, as much as I admire the set design for Cat in the Hat, it's still kind of garbage as a movie. Like, it's weirdly mean-spirited and obsessed with being meta, so, the ratings are warranted, I think. But then I look at ratings for other campy movies like George of the Jungle, and I'm honestly kind of baffled. Like, that movie is super fun and goofy while also being wholesome, and I'm convinced that people are just too stuck up to see it. Which I guess brings me back to the fact that camp has always been subject to more scrutiny than average. It seems that the pretentious cinema buffs of yore were also just as allergic to genuine expressions of zaniness as people today. Okay, that's a little harsh. I understand these sorts of things aren't for everyone, and that's fine. I'm not trying to force people to like things they're not into, but given how much this sort of content has disappeared in recent decades, I do think there's more going on behind the scenes, so let's talk about it. Cringe culture. Everything is embarrassing, everyone is embarrassing, trying is embarrassing, being genuine is embarrassing, existing is embarrassing, being perceived is embarrassing, it's all just embarrassing, and you suck. Honestly, there are plenty of videos on YouTube discussing in depth the rise and persistence of cringe culture, so I'm not going to get into it here, but I will say this. Is it really that surprising that the generation, aka my generation, the first one to grow up with smartphones and social media, is the way it is? And now that we're older and independent enough for our actions and opinions to actually hold some weight on what does and doesn't perform at the box office, on streaming services, on music platforms, etc., the consequences of our upbringing are starting to show. Many of us have grown up in this catch-22 of a panopticon where we're both the warden and the prisoners, always being observed, always observing others, always comparing, always judging, always being judged, always everything. And it seems the primary coping mechanism we've come up with is to abandon all authenticity and willingness to openly care about things. Seriously, watch any rom-com from the 80s and 90s, and it'll become so obvious how lacking romance movies are nowadays because all the characters have to be nonchalant about everything, and there can never be any pining or real displays of vulnerability without some comedic interjection half a second later to make sure the audience doesn't have to sit with the oh so terrible, awful discomfort of witnessing two people, actually connecting with one another. Everything must be caked with at least 7 layers of irony, and I'm just exhausted. Now, is all hope lost? No. I think that the success of media like Barbie, Guardians of the Galaxy, Jumanji, Wednesday, Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves shows that deep down, people do actually kind of still like camp. But, and I'm gonna be so serious when I say this, if we do not kill cringe culture, we are going to miss out on so many funny, interesting, and creative stories. Like, you can't get the cult classics if no one has the space to take any actual risks and do things that are new and interesting. But it's going to be up to us as a collective to make a space where that sort of creative expression is okay. So if you're a fan of storytelling, stop making fun of writers or musicians or actors when they display genuine emotion or passion. And if you're a creative yourself, please do not dull down your story just to make it more palatable. You are not the problem. Society is the problem. Look, I like to think that God created the world with some degree of whimsy and silliness. So why are we still so afraid of just being excited about things, about going all in, about celebrating being alive and feeling wonder and joy and happiness? Seriously, I'm tired of living in a culture that feels buried under a 3-foot cement coating of nonchalance all the time. It's suffocating. So yeah, bring back camp. And if you like this video, consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel. Bye!